back to the Cult Products podcast. I'm Phil. I'm here with Alex and Adam again, and we are talking a bit more about branding this week. So following up on last week, we spoke about how you get to a value proposition. Now we're going to talk about what you do with all the strategy work around personas, target market, value proposition, all that kind of stuff, how you then start to bring it to life and turn it into what most people would commonly recognize as a brand. So, should we get straight in?
Let's
do
dive
it.
straight in.
Okay, cool. So, we have our value proposition. We know what market we're going after. We know what people in that market we're targeting. Next thing that we look at is a blue ocean strategy. And we do that as part of the series of workshops that we run. What that is based on is a book called Blue Ocean Strategy, which was once thrown at me by my CEO at the time. He picked up, I think, 3 or 4 copies at the airport and said, this is a book that you absolutely have to read. It's really, really important to what we're trying to do as a business. It's not necessarily just about branding, but branding is one of the things that comes under that. What it's really about is about saying, how are you going to take your business and how are you going to orient what you compete on around what your customers care about, not what everyone else cares about. So the example that I like to use, because I play a lot of video games and particularly a lot of Nintendo video games, is the Nintendo Wii. And if you think about the time when that came out, so you had your Xboxes and your PlayStations and all of those kind of things, where it was mainly about, getting close to photorealistic graphics. There's a lot of games where you run around with a gun, shooting your friends on the internet, and all of those kind of things. And there was probably, you're probably getting a picture in your mind of the kind of people who would play those sort of games and own those kind of things. And then one Christmas, we got this little white box that, even the fact that it was white when everything else was like a shiny kind of black box, it was like, this looks a bit weird and a bit different. And instead of having, a little control pad, you had this funny remote control stick thing. And instead of running around playing war games with people, you were playing golf with funny little cartoon characters, and your nan was playing with you, and the whole family were involved, and everyone obviously just went absolutely mad for it, and they actually sold more Nintendo Wiis than they did PlayStations and Xboxes. And that's because they intentionally set out to create something that was really different from what everyone else was doing. So they looked at, people who play games. They realized that a lot of people were starting to play, things like Candy Crush and things on mobile, and that there was a huge market for, huge untapped market for people who are non-traditional gamers. And rather than say, right, we're going to release a Nintendo that's going to have photorealistic graphics, it's going to compete on all the same things as the Xbox and the PlayStation, they said, forget about that. Graphics aren't going to be as good. Doesn't matter. We're going to have these motion control things that nobody else has. And when we think about games, we're actually going to really focus more than what our competitors are doing on games that are inclusive and loads of people can play. And so instantly, if you put a Nintendo Wii next to a PlayStation at the time, you'd go, this is like not just a very different thing, but it's very obvious how it's different. It's very deliberately different. And so it wasn't just a case of, well, which one of these things should I buy? Which one has the best graphics? Which one costs the least? It was, well, I can do things on a Nintendo Wii that I can't do on a PlayStation or an Xbox. And you can literally say, these are the factors that Nintendo looked at, and they said, right, we're going to do a bit less of these things that everyone else is doing. You think about the graphics, things like that. A bit more of these things that, some people are doing a little bit. So, inclusive family games, all that kind of stuff. We're going to totally create this new thing around motion control that doesn't exist before. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're just going to eliminate. We're just not going to bother doing at all. and you can then plot that against what everyone else is doing, and you can see where the gaps are on each of those different competing factors, so that you have a very, very crystal clear, tangible strategy of saying, this is how we're going to deviate from what everyone else is doing. We call that a blue ocean strategy, as opposed to a red ocean strategy, because quite aggressively, the idea is that a red ocean is full of blood because everyone is, kind of attacking each other. Whereas when you're in a blue ocean by yourself, it's kind of plain sailing and it's, nice, calm blue waters. So anyway, the point is, as part of our branding process, what we do is we actually work with businesses to try and understand what the things that their market actually does care about, things that are being underserved by people who are currently working in those spaces, and to try and define and plot specifically what the different things that they're doing are that are setting them apart from everyone else. And the reason that we do that is because that gives us a framework when we start to think about the brand and how we communicate, who we're communicating to, what elements we're ramping up, how we want it to feel and how we want it to look. We're actually focused on what are the things that are going to differentiate you. And that is fundamental, because that's how you get into category of one monopoly space, where you are the only logical choice for the people who want to solve the problem that you're solving, and away from commoditized red ocean space where everything is basically just which is the cheapest one of these things that I can buy. So it's a really, really crucial but quite challenging thing to define, that once you have that, helps with understanding how you position your product, how you do your brand, what you talk about in your marketing, all of those kinds of things. And as you saw from Nintendo Wii and numerous other products, has a huge commercial impact.
Wow, that was very impressive, isn't it? But also, like, yeah, it makes it seem like really clear when you think about that. I think like Nintendo were kind of one of the first kind of cult products in a way, weren't they? Because like Mario and all the characters that they created were things that like people like the other competitors weren't really focusing on. And I guess it's I mean, I go out and like when I hang out with my kind of nephews, they're still like using the Wii. Like the Wii is like such a fundamental thing that they play with, and it's great. Probably one of the best consoles that's been invented in the last 10 years. But yeah, exactly that. It just kind of hit all the right kind of notes in terms of creating something that was super inclusive, all the family can play with, and different to anything else that was out there. So how does this then kind of translate into? Obviously, here we're talking more still around the strategy, but obviously this does also kind of play into, as you said, around the like look and feel and the personality elements as well, doesn't it? So it's kind of
Well, it's back to that. It's knowing what you do, knowing how it's different, and being intentional about following a path that's based off what people actually care about, and not falling in. We'll talk about this a bit when we get into visuals as well. Not falling into the trap of just assuming that what everyone else is doing is actually the right thing to be doing. It's sort of carving out your own path. And I think when you have that clarity on those things that that make you different, certainly when we get down to the level of writing brand strategies and things, you turn that into they become the factors that are most prominent in that brand story. We really care about this. We really stand for this thing, but we're not actually as bothered about this other thing. And naturally, I think that feeds into the feeling that you want to try and create from a brand, and how it feels different. I mean, not to just keep banging on about Nintendo and say like Sony, but if you put those two brands next to each other, they are very different from each other, because their product and the things that they care about and compete over feel so different. And even when Sony launched their own motion controls, they still felt very much like they were in that kind of traditional gamer space, whereas Nintendo, everything that they were it was encapsulated in their brand and the feeling of all those kind of things. So it's just intrinsically it's just linked, isn't it? It all comes from the same space.
But I think, yeah, I'd add also like doing that kind of exercise and understanding what that kind of blue ocean strategy is will then help you really clearly like define what your brand values are and underpin those values. Because you say, I think it's the same thing, right? Like two are intrinsically connected. Like, the brand values of Nintendo are kind of are different to the brand values of like a Sony PlayStation. And I think those are that's a really core component of the brand as well, essentially. And I think you can only kind of redefine that if you're clear on on all those things that we've just discussed. So yeah, it's definitely fundamental to that too.
Yeah, you have to get quite granular to be able to do that exercise, and I think when you can get to a level of granularity or specificity about what makes you different, that's when you really start to be able to bring it to life more effectively. It's a terrible spot to be in if you say, well, how are you different from everyone else? And your only answer is, we're better, we're nicer, we're faster, those kind of things. But if you can say, well, actually, we are different because everyone else prioritizes this thing, but we don't actually care about that. What we care about is this thing that nobody else does care about. I think then you're like, that's getting me thinking creatively about something that's much less generic and much more interesting and specific to that company's identity.
Yeah, definitely.
So to understand all that, would you, when you're like helping clients create that blue ocean strategy, is it like a workshop? Is it you going away and like asking them lots of questions, interviewing them? How do you get to that output? Because it's so important. Like, how do you? What's the practicality around it?
So you have to start, I think, with the problem that you're trying to solve, the outcome that you're trying to get to, the value that you're trying to deliver to people, and then look at who else is focused on those things, who's also trying to add that value. Who else could your customers go to and say, I'd like to solve my problem with you? And when you have that, you can literally line all those websites up, line all their sales collateral, whatever it is, and say, okay, let's look at this. What is it that they are talking about all the time? What are the things that they are trying to, like, what are they selling? What are they trying to get people to buy? And you be able to plot and say, okay, well, I've looked at 15 different people. All of them are telling me that they have the fastest AI chatbot around, or they look at the most amount of data points or whatever, and you can just start to just write those things down and say that these are the things that everyone is talking about, and then you can look at those and say, well, where are we on that? And it's literally just a case of saying, is it high, medium, or low? In fact, better to really say where they are. So most of the market is saying this is the biggest priority. Is it kind of middle? Is they're talking about it, but it's kind of low priority? Literally plot that on a chart, and then think about where you stand in relation to those things. And some of them, you have to match, like the table stakes things. If you don't have those things, people aren't going to buy from you because it's fundamental to what they expect. And some of those things you can kind of challenge the market a little bit and say, well, actually, I don't think that stuff really delivers much value, or you care about it that much, so we're going to deviate from that thing. And then some of those things you might say we're just going to eliminate entirely. But then you also probably, if you are like an innovative startup, have a bunch of stuff that you're inventing that doesn't exist. And so you plot those things as well. So you have this sort of chart where you say, here's where everyone else is, here's how we track in relation to those things. And then at the end, here are some things that we're totally creating from scratch that we're going to be about. And so we would do that in a workshop by saying, go and research competitors, do some do like a little kind of micro presentation back on what it is that they compete with, and then we'll capture all of that, and then we'll kind of literally go through like Price is Right and sort of say higher or lower through each one of those things. And then what we do is we pull from the value proposition work that we've done what some of the things that they're able to offer as what we call either kind of painkillers or game creators that are just totally new and innovative things, and then stick them on the end.
Or a Brucey bonus if you're talking about Price is Right.
Right, yes. We should.
Brucey bonus.
Yeah. Isn't that what it was? Brucey bonus? Was that on the Price is Right?
Yeah, no, that's right. I think we might struggle because a lot of our clients are obviously in North America. I'm not sure whether Bruce Forsyth. That's true. But they still, Price is Right is still a.
Is it?
I think it was an American.
It sounds like an American show. Is that the one where it's like higher or lower? This washing machine, is it like higher or lower than 50 quid? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the cards, and you just turn over the deck of cards.
The
Is
cards.
that
right? Is that the same show?
I thought high and low was when they just had like random like stuff.
What was that one then? Sorry, I'm getting confused. I don't know. Game shows.
I'm not sure. I think Bruce Forsyth presented both of them, and I think they might be the same show, but I'm not entirely sure.
Generic 90s show.
Just all merging into Challenge TV.
Yeah. Anyway.
I don't know.
But yeah, great. So when you've got your blue ocean strategy, that's kind of, I guess, a good springboard for the next step of the process. Which would be
starting to look at the archetypes, which we did touch upon on last week's episode, but I think if we should go into a bit more detail around them. So this is the bit I think is a personal favourite of mine, because I think it's the bit where all of this stuff just starts coming together into something that feels a bit more real. And as you say, a lot of this is quite kind of heavy and it's quite abstract, and we start to kind of synthesize it down. And I think the archetypes is where it really starts to come to life as something, as I say, a bit more tangible. So what is an archetype? So an archetype essentially is a type of we use archetypes to connect with people. So essentially, like in behavior archetypes, where if you've done any behavioral science and understand who you are, it's kind of a similar thing. So we attach these to actual people that represent those archetypes. So, for example, the sage is an archetype, which would be kind of understanding, and we kind of connect that to an actual personality, and the personality being someone like a Yoda or a David Attenborough. And all these different archetypes essentially are the things that kind of make up your brand. We generally have them on what we call an archetype wheel, and there's how many of them? There are 12 archetypes in total. And what's really good about using this as a thing, just because visually it's really engaging, it's really easy to kind of see someone like David Attenborough and associate different things around that person, or see someone like, let's say, David Bowie, who's the magician, and associate things around that person, and then connect that to the brand itself. So it's a really powerful tool to kind of understand how your brand will show up, like what is the kind of individual personality of your brand. And generally speaking, it's a cocktail of different of these archetypes, which make it really interesting. So pairing something like the sage, for example, with something like the creator will create something quite unique. And that's the kind of exercise that we take people through. So it might be worth going through these different archetypes to get a bit of an understanding of them, so we can kind of dive into each one individually, and kind of go through them and express what they mean, what they stand for, because I do think it's such an important exercise for people to do. And we will probably provide some kind of information on this, because I imagine it's quite difficult to picture it. So,
yeah.
So as I say,
there's the 12.
There's the 12 archetypes. So, and we split these up into kind of 4 different segments, essentially, like archetypes that leave legacy, archetypes that kind of pursue connection, and archetypes that provide structure, and archetypes that explore spirituality. So the ones that are around leaving legacy are the rebel, the magician, the hero, and the lover. The rebel, as you imagine, is like the kind of, if you imagine it in the brand states, the brands like Dr. Martens, like Harley Davidson, Virgin, kind of brands that are quite disruptive, that have a bit of attitude or like stand for something. So they basically demand more than they can get. So it's kind of all about freedom, all about like pushing the boundaries. So quite like anarchic in a word. Anarchic is not a word. Anarchic? How do you say that? Anarchy.
Anarchist.
Anarchic.
Oh.
I think anarchist.
Arachnophobia.
Arachnophobic. That's the one. Then you've got within that kind of quadrant, the magician, which I said is like the one that when you think of brands that have that kind of more magical element, you think of things like Disney, you think of Coca-Cola with their like Christmas adverts, you think of brands like, like that have that kind of like level of something about them that's kind of more like, I guess, transformational, mystical, and thinking a bit like kind of beyond. And then the hero, which is always quite a popular one, which is when you think about bands like Nike, kind of like just do it, that kind of attitude. It's really around like about being stronger together. So it's about a collective energy, that one, and about bringing people together for a better kind of, I guess, future. So yeah, brands like Nike, Adidas, Netflix are really kind of the embodiment of that one. Then you've got the lover, which is like a much more softer brand. It's brands like, you see like M&S, like you see a lot of their campaigns and the way that they kind of present themselves. So this is a bit more kind of reassuring, like highly empathetic. And, people that we would kind of attune to that one would be like someone like Marilyn Monroe or something like that. So that's kind of around like the leave legacy kind of quadrant. Then you've got your kind of more like connection archetypes, which are like have a little bit more clues in the title around connecting to a person. So you've got the jester, which this archetype's really, if you think about brands like Dr. Pepper, and they had a lot of those kind of back in the 90s, those kind of funny ads around that, and they kind of really lean into more of that kind of humor and stuff within their brand itself. M&M do that to a degree, like MailChimp, you get those funny little kind of nuances when you're interacting with them, and little kind of play on words and tone of voice, all that kind of stuff, which is really, so they're more like fun and a bit more like kind of, I guess, positive and playful. People like Jim Carrey, like,
don't take themselves as seriously.
I say, yeah, they're definitely like a softer brand that don't take themselves too seriously. A little bit self-deprecating in that sense. So yeah, which is quite interesting. Then you got the everyman archetype, which again, this is like a very popular one in a lot of the work we do. This is kind of brands like IKEA, McDonald's, John Lewis. They're like the ones that are kind of there for the every person, essentially, and they're kind of really about driving connection, togetherness, equality, all that kind of stuff. Caregiver, which is clues in the title, but these ones are a lot more kind of brands that are doing good in the world. So you're thinking about brands like, charity brands like UNICEF and I don't know, WWF, but then also like brands like Headspace. When you think about them, they're kind of caring brands are out for to like invoke kind of ideas about supporting and all that kind of stuff, and quite reassuring. And then you got last but not least the ruler, which is like, as you imagine, it's quite a harsh brand. I think ones that kind of where you want to kind of be the best. It's like the best or nothing at all, and that's really it's around like brands when you think of them like Mercedes, Rolex, kind of Louis Vuitton. They're all about like being the best at what they do. And this isn't a negative brand. It's quite interesting. A lot of people, when we go through the archetypes, see this as a negative brand. It's actually like, if you pair that with a softer archetype, it's like you can create something really interesting. So that's the kind of ruler. And then the last kind of the line, if you will, is we've got the creator archetype, which is essentially around innovation, around kind of inspiration. It's very aspirational. Brands like Apple will fit into this one, hence why a lot of founders like are drawn to the creator archetype. Spotify and like YouTube, all these kind of mainly like kind of tech companies that are like thinking a little bit different and doing things a little bit differently. The innocent archetype, which as you say is quite an obvious one there. And you think about brands like Dove and softer brands like maybe like even Aesop and Boots and more supportive ones. So when we're doing like more, I guess, beauty brands, we don't really do them, but if you are, that's kind of like that kind of area. The Sage, which we've covered, again, this is one around like guiding, like knowledgeable, assurance, all that kind of stuff. And when we use David Attenborough as a really like a really kind of good figurehead of the Sage, and you think about brands like that you get a lot of kind of information from, like BBC, or like just kind of brands that you trust, like National Geographic, for example. So it's about wisdom, intelligence, and all that kind of stuff. And then last but not least, we've got the Explorer, which is all about freedom. So it's all about kind of like going out there, exploring the world. And essentially that one's more around like brands like, I guess, Patagonia would be a good example. Yeah, for Explorer, we always kind of talk about Patagonia because that's a great brand with a great kind of brand values. GoPro, Land Rover, North Face, kind of stuff like that would kind of fit into there. So, and then obviously like an archetype, like probably like Indiana Jones would be that person that you're like looking at. So I guess like in a nutshell, it's a combination of like these very distinct like archetypes that then can be relatable because you kind of put a personality there, but also like kind of brands that we know that have been going for a while. You kind of understand what they kind of, how you can, I guess, map them to these archetypes. And okay,
take a breath.
Breathe. There's a very long kind of overview of them. So why do we actually kind of use archetypes? Well, the idea is that we kind of, in a workshop scenario, we asked our clients to really like study these archetypes and start to think about how, based on the kind of value proposition, the work and insights that we've done ahead, start to really kind of isolate like the archetypes that represent their brand. So essentially, like what we like to do is kind of narrow this down to what we call like a cocktail of archetypes. Generally, about 3 is a good number. So if you're doing this exercise, it's kind of like the amount of archetypes that you want to kind of get down to, and then really establishing like what is the weight of this like cocktail. So like what is the kind of mix essentially, which is really key. And essentially, like for example, if you're, I don't know, like a cybersecurity company, like, you want to obviously have something like the Sage archetype is really important because it's about trust. It's about knowledge. It's about, kind of path to wisdom, if you will. But then, there might be things like Phil was saying in terms of like once you define that kind of blue ocean strategy, there might be something that you can add in there that can really kind of make it a bit more unique. So something maybe from the more innovation kind of side of things. So something in the creator element or something in the hero element that can like actually give it a bit more personality. So it's about like playing with those different archetypes and then creating like a really interesting mix that will then kind of lead into like how you then communicate and visualize the brand essentially. I'll stop there because there was a lot.
Wow. Okay, that was great. That's a really good overview. I was wondering how much, you said, say if you're a cybersecurity company, there are some obvious, you might want to be in the Sage. Most tech companies want to be in that creator space. How much do you lean into what's expected of you as a brand, and how much do you say, actually, no, I want to do something that's quite different? You mentioned MailChimp, which I think is quite an interesting example. It's potentially quite a dry product. You're just sending out emails en masse to people, and for people who aren't familiar with their brand, they have, firstly, they're called MailChimp. Secondly, their mascot is a little postman monkey thing, and a lot of their tone of voice and things like that it's all very it's kind of fun, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, all those kinds of things. You could easily compare them to any number of other services that also send out bulk emails, and they look totally different because they are, the rest of them all look more how you would expect. They're quite dry. They don't have a chimp. They're, called things like constant contact and stuff like that. So, I guess it's worked for MailChimp. It's a riskier option. It's high risk and high reward, I'd say.
I think so. Yeah.
How should people listening to this podcast, if they're thinking about their own brand, how much do you conform to what's expected of you, and how do you know when to differentiate?
It's interesting because when we kind of go through this exercise and like we isolate like the types of archetypes and stuff, when we do that kind of more weighting element, I think that's when, people get a little bit nervous because like, okay, how much do I want to really like dial up the creator aspects of this brand in the cybersecurity like company? I want it to feel like modern and innovative, but I don't want to scare off people. I think that's really where like the kind of, I guess the next phase of the project, where you kind of start to like push like those ideas a bit further, or push or encourage them to explore like, what could it look like if we did explore that? But we know that we've got the kind of safeguard of having the sage still here. I think it's really like trying to, I think generally clients are quite nervous. They'll like want to be like, let's just keep it split evenly. But I think it's really like encouraging them that, as you said, like someone like MailChimp would have had to have taken that like leap of faith and explored that. And then once they kind of got out of their comfort zone, realized that actually this is quite a unique, and it doesn't feel like super too edgy, or doesn't feel too, I guess, controversial. I think it's really like, you don't know what you don't know, and and it's about trying to like encourage the client to I guess explore those avenues. And it might be like you go too far and you have to pull it back, but if you don't, then as you say, it will just be a kind of a very vanilla type of outcome essentially.
Is it like when you're in those workshops identifying all those archetypes, would you say on average most people are like, oh, let's just go straight down the middle, 3 of them have equal weighting and let's see what happens? Or do you ever find that you've got a situation where people are so convinced that they are definitely the hero and a tiny bit sage? Like what's the kind of...
I mean, definitely. I guess like, I think really if you've taken them on the journey, if we've done the workshop like effectively, then they should be much more like enthusiastic about kind of pushing boundaries a little bit more. So hopefully if we've done our job right by that time, like it's quite a kind of easy like kind of selling to be like, no, let's like look at trying to dial up some of the more, I guess, edgier archetypes are the ones that are going to give us something a bit different essentially. But yeah, a lot of the time you do get that. Like safe is always like the easy option, isn't it?
Definitely. So once you've done the archetypes section in the workshops, what's the next step? Knowing that you've got these archetypes down, I know that there's another quite a crucial.
Yeah,
piece.
we do, and this is quite another quite a fun exercise to do, and you can do it on your own or do it with your kind of a business partner, but really just creating what we call visual cues. Like we have a set of visual cues, it's essentially adjectives that describe like a look and feel of a brand, like the tangible look and feel. And they're words like, is it soft, is it hard, is it like complex, is it like all these kind of things. And really it's a really good exercise to, once they're in that mindset of like, okay, well, I kind of get an idea of like what this is going to look like from kind of going through the archetypes and like and defining those, then it's like, okay, now what can I see it visualize? How am I visualizing this? And I think it's a really good way to just start to gain a bit of insight into what the actual thing is going to like look and feel like essentially. So a good way to do that is get a load of words, get a load of these adjectives, and start to like remove the ones that aren't applicable based on the kind of archetypes, and then just kind of leave the ones that you do, and that will help essentially when you start developing mood boards, start developing creative. You've got these really like kind of clear guidance that can just kind of give you the kind of elements to start like finding visualizations of how the brand's actually going to look and appear.
I think one of the things that I like about that exercise is because when we do it, they are literally just words written in black and white. There's no prompting to say, do you like this visual? You are having to think about, okay, now we've done all this strategy, how would I describe the look and feel that I would like the brand to have, based off that strategy. So it still leaves things quite open for then somebody to say, okay, somebody said that they want a brand that has a feel that is very soft. Okay, now I can think about, that's enough of a jumping off point, rather than pointing at something and going, I want it to look like that. And I think that's another one of those times where it's like push the aesthetics down the line as far as possible, so that you don't kind of box yourself in too much.
Definitely.
I wonder, to be honest, even really calling them visual cues is a little bit misleading, because a lot of things actually, like, it's not about the look of it, it's about the feel of it.
I think that's
that does
all the sound of the words.
I'm pretty
sure Spikey's on the visual cues.
Spikey's on there, yeah. But as Phil said, these are they're just words, and I think that's really key, because as soon as you start, I don't know, we've talked about like just avoiding bringing visuals in, and we don't, in this whole process, we haven't like brought any kind of mood boards or anything. I always think it'd be interesting if you run that exercise at the start of the project, like the words that you've given, because it's like, it is, that would be very based on like their own personal preferences. But what's really good is that by the time you've gone through all the sections of the workshop, everyone's on the same page. And I think that's really important, so that all those kind of the answers are they're collaborative, and they're all kind of done as in unison. So it's I thought it'd be interesting if you did run the visual cues first to see, like, I think you just have an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, do it before and after.
Because you can't, and it's great when they're like talking about the visual cues, but you're talking about the strategy and what the archetypes are saying, and that gives you kind of like the platform to be able to make better decisions there. So
yeah. And actually, you make a really interesting point there, which is that just the nature of doing these kinds of workshops and bringing people with you and have collaborating on creating this stuff, there is often a lot of tension and different opinions and all that kind of natural stuff that you get in businesses. But this as a process actually helps to reframe the problem as one of how do we best appeal to our target market and grow our business, so that generally speaking, people are by this point pretty aligned on how they have to create a brand to achieve that objective. And I think that's why it's quite important to get the right people in the room when you are actually defining all of this stuff, because if you leave somebody out who could potentially throw a spanner in the works later, we've seen this happen before, and they haven't been brought on that journey, they could totally derail everything, or just fail to really ever adopt the brand as something that they feel a sense of ownership of, and therefore it doesn't really have the impact that it's intended to have or has the potential to have.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think that's a really good point, because it's so emotionally like charged, this whole process. I think that you're discovering a lot of information, like kind of some heavy stuff, like kind of nailing down and putting a flag on your value proposition, which is always can be quite contentious sometimes, but it's always quite it's a real amazing thing to get that down and do that. But then also like the brand itself, obviously that's like your baby. If you're a founder, it's so important that it kind of represents, like it needs to represent personality in terms of your intended audience, but also like it's a reflection of you as well. So it's really important to kind of all be collaborative and all be on that journey together.
Yes, buy-in, very important.
Indeed.
Great.
Okay, well, there are obviously further stages after this that lead to creating a brand, but I think we're going to leave those that next phase for next time. So that'll be in part 3 of this conversation on branding, and we're going to leave you there. So thank you everybody for listening. Hope you found that enlightening, and if you did, please like and subscribe to the podcast. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
No worries.
All right. Well, we will see you next week for the 3rd part of this conversation about brand.
Indeed. See you then.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.